Yeah guys, what up, Viper here, and today I want to give you guys a deep dive into the Ranger in Illuvium. What is your Ranger offering your team, how to bond, and just all the, I don't know, these small intricacies and sometimes also just really big things that you have to always keep in mind that you should pay attention to, and what you can do every single turn to min-max the usage of your Ranger, to min-max the usage of bonding in Illuvium, because those are super fundamental parts of the game. Alright, let's look at this example. First of all, let's clarify what bonding is for our Ranger. Bonding means hitting this little plus symbol next to your Ranger's health bar and dragging it onto an Illuvial, essentially giving your Ranger the dominant affinity and the dominant trait that the Illuvial has. Meaning in, for example, Null, that is a nature and bulwark dominant because it starts out as Cling, which is a nature and bulwark Illuvial, and then it goes to a Verdant, and then it goes to a Verdant Colossus. Doesn't change this dominant though. Like, they just stay what they initially were. I think that is gonna be applied to the game in the future updates. So depending on when you watch this video, from what we've been teased, it's gonna be that they always have this baseline Illuvial thing and they're gonna keep it. But if you watch this video like very early when it releases, that patch might not be live yet, and something like a Cardulox that is a toxic Illuvial and starts out as a water could be a nature or water dominant. So pay attention to that in the team builder when choosing your Illuvials, that you choose the correct dominant affinities. And yeah, if you're watching this video like some point in the future, that probably is already changed in the game, and they all have the dominant one that their like little stage 1 version always starts out with. Now, further back to this topic though, your Ranger gets the added thing that the Illuvial had, right? And your Ranger can also equip a weapon, and that weapon also gives you a affinity and the secondary synergy thing, right? The Bulwark or Psion or whatever. Which means that your Ranger now has 2 of each. So your Ranger is going to have 2 composites. Composites are combinations of, for example, nature plus nature makes a Verdant. So if your Ranger is bonded to this Null and equips a nature weapon, it's going to be a Verdant. And it's not going to count for any nature things anymore. It used to be nature before, now it's not anymore. It's the double nature combo, so to say. And then the second one, in the Null case, that is Colossus, right? So if you give your Ranger a Bulwark plus nature weapon, then it's going to be 2 Bulwark and 2 nature combination. 2 Bulwark makes Colossus, 2 nature makes a Verdant. So that is like a simple idea, right? Where you have this one big Illuvial that you start out the game with. It has these 2 composites, Verdant and Colossus. You equip the fitting weapon to just have 2 Verdant, 2 Colossus active. Probably a good start into the game. And that is, that's like the most basic idea of this, right? Now, the cool thing about the Ranger in the flow of the game is you can change your Ranger's positioning whenever you want, and you don't have to pay mastery points for that. If I play my Null here on turn 1 and I want to move it on turn 2, I have to pay points for that, which you usually don't want to do because, yeah, well, you want to spend points on bringing more strong creatures into the game in the earlier fights, in the earlier stages of the game, and then later on you can adjust the positioning. Because if you bringing in more things kind of adjusts your positioning as well, like positioning tanks differently, damage dealers differently, and so on. By just bringing in new guys instead of repositioning the existing ones, so you have the highest possible power level. Now, that oftentimes can be troublesome though, because if you just blindly do something wrong, you can only adjust so much by bringing in more things. And that is one of the super strong things about your Ranger, especially if your Ranger is in a carry role, because your Ranger can be moved every turn whenever. So you don't have to spend points on that. So let's say the opponent has rogues, assassins that jump to this left side, and you have a ranged carry on your Ranger. You can just move it to the other side for the next turn. And if your opponent wants to match you, they have to spend money on that. And the more money they spend, then the further they fall behind, because you don't have to spend money on doing these switches every turn. Obviously, you have to pay attention that you don't die if you keep losing health points, right? So you can also like you don't have to do these all-in moves with just full left or right. You can also try to avoid rogues, for example, by moving the ranger in the front or in the back or wherever. This is especially meaningful because if you know, for example, your opponent is just going to place some tank in the first few turns and they're going to place a tank in the middle, you could, for example, put your ranger on a front corner. And then if the other guy has a tank and a assassin, the assassin is just going to walk up to your big tank first because the path is just closer, right? The path, like from wherever they jump, it's probably going to be closer. If your guy is here, they just walk to the big dude. If they jump to anywhere on this side, they walk to the big dude, and then you can adjust that for the following turns and so on and so on. So just, I don't know, just keep moving your ranger around, right? It's probably going to throw your opponent off because then they cannot predict where they want to place their new things. And yeah, that is really, really good, and keep attention, keep reminding yourself of that. Now, another thing is that you can just swap the weapons and the equipments of your ranger whenever you want to. Now, there's one cool trick in which, because if you sell an Illuvium, you have to, like, you won't get 100% of the points back. Let's say you sell a 100 cost Illuvium, you get 75% back, 75 back minus 25. If I have a 10 cost weapon on my ranger before, which is kind of the standard that people open the early game with, and I upgrade that to a 70 cost and I equip a 40 cost suit, that is spending 100 points, but I can just unequip that the next turn and I don't pay that penalty. So if I want to make a big move in that next turn, I can just have a really strong ranger in one turn, and then I just unequip those things, and the next turn I have 100 more points, and I can make some really, really big plays that my opponent maybe has a hard time predicting, because now my opponent is just spending 100 points less than I do in that turn, right? So that's a really, really cool thing to keep just reminding yourself of, or even just adjusting early game, right? You can go from a 10 to a 25 cost weapon if you just otherwise would have 15 points left over, and then the next turn you can unequip that 25, put it to a 10 again, you have plus 15. Maybe, for example, on, I don't know, turn 4, if you want to bring in 2 Colossus tanks, Cardulox and Titanor together is 155 points. You would only have 140 usually. You have this plus 15 from downgrading your weapon. Bam, you can now bring in 2 big tanks at the same time, having their composite already activated. And then I think the last really, really big thing on the ranger and the weapons and the equipment on that topic is that you can also just entirely swap the weapon. You don't have to stick to the first weapon. Let's say you equip a nature bulwark weapon, you don't have to stick to that. For example, let's say we start with a Dinal and the ranger, we do a verdant colossus combo, nice. Next turn we could, for example, bring in a Cardulox and swap to a water shield, a water bulwark on the ranger, and then we can swap from verdant to toxic. If, let's say, we just need the damage of toxic, verdant, a very defensive trait, maybe our opponent did an opening that is just dealing very, very well with defensive openings, and we swap to, well, we still keep our strategy of playing these tank Illuviums, but we can just alternate the ranger weapon to activate the toxic trait or the verdant trait, depending on if you need more tankiness or if you need more damage. And then later on in the game, we could even, for example, put in an Adorius, which is a spore Illuvium. It's also a nature composite, right? You guys see the trend here. It's a nature composite, another nature composite, another nature composite, and you're bonding the ranger to the null, which is a nature Illuvium, so the ranger always has nature. But what can we control? The weapon that we equip. Therefore, we have access to verdant or toxic or spore, depending on what we need at the given time. And that is a really powerful idea to keep in mind, that you can just, okay, you can bond your ranger to this Illuvium. Now my ranger has this, and how can I deviate my game plan depending on what my opponent is throwing at me by maybe just swapping the weapon, which is very cost effective because it doesn't cost you anything. You can unequip whatever weapon, no penalty. You can equip whatever new weapon to the ranger every single turn, and you can move your ranger around every single turn as well. Meaning if, let's say, our ranger starts out as a tank with this nature bulwark combination, great. Then we can put it in the front line. It can tank the enemy front line. If the enemy brings in rogues, assassins, for example, we could move the ranger to the back line, protecting, for example, our Adorius that maybe previously didn't have protection because we had played our tanks in the front line, and then our opponent would surprise us with the assassins, but preemptively you can just put the ranger in the backline, and maybe your opponent got, so to say, baited by thinking that the Adorius is unprotected and big tanks in the front line. You would have to pay money to move them. Not with the ranger, you can just move the ranger and protect your backline Illuvium with that. On the other side, you could also swap from a Bulwark plus Bulwark into Colossus, like the ranger being a tank, to any different options. For example, equipping a sword plus a Bulwark makes your ranger a behemoth, which is a very damage oriented trait, a very 1v1 oriented trait, and that changes the whole idea what your ranger is supposed to be doing in the fight. So if you wouldn't be able to move your ranger and it's a tank and now you just swap it to a damage dealer by swapping the weapon, it's getting focused, it would die. Nope, you can put the ranger wherever it will be the safest in the fight, and then it can walk up and do the damage dealing job. So that is usually, yeah, another really strong thing that you can just pull off by these bondings, that you can swap between the different composites easily, right? You can keep the nature one and you just put in a Jotun or a Seer. Those are the behemoth Illuviums, for example, and you just swap to, for example, a nature sword or a water sword or a air sword, and you can still choose all of these, like whatever you currently want, and then you make a ranger the behemoth damage dealer if, let's say, in the late game you just need more damage. Early game tanks, that's really good in the matchup, or for whatever reason, right? Maybe surprising your opponent, maybe adapting to their strategy, maybe because only later on you can bring in the Illuvius that you want to activate those traits with, and so on and so on. So yeah, I think that is the fundamental things that I want to tell you guys about how to use the Ranger in Illuvium and how to utilize it to the utmost capabilities. So I hope this video helped you guys. It's very beginner oriented, I would say, but I think it's very valuable if you're, I don't know, like a little bit advanced, have been playing the game a little bit, but maybe didn't pay so much attention to like all the crazy things that you can do, especially with running multiple weapons and swapping from turn to turn what your ranger's role is in the game, even just throwing your opponent off what they are supposed to do or supposed to counter as well. Very strong, and I hope you guys can make use of the strategy. See you guys in the next one.